Lando said that next year is his year. Do we agree? I mean, this is the guy he has to beat, Max Verstappen, now a 4-time world champion. Can Lando? Is Lando the guy to do it if the car's there?
I'm not sure Lando is the guy based on what we saw throughout 2024. Now, I think what we saw this year was, I mean, we talked about Max Verstappen a lot. And first of all, amazing season. I think that it's really easy to overlook how good Max was throughout the year. But we've kind of reached this point again, haven't we, where Max's racing style has been in the news so much that a few drivers have now mentioned it. George has mentioned it, and I think that McLaren privately would tell you the one person who's given you the blueprint of how to race this guy for a championship is Lewis Hamilton. And I'm not sure that Lando has really, put that flag down as much as he needed to. I think that Austin and Mexico clearly surprised him. The fact that, especially Mexico, that Max did made that move that he made. But I think that until people across the grid and maybe watching Formula One can buy that Lando can actually beat him across the season, they have to see that. Whether it's them to actually collide Lando saying, I'm not yielding to you. And I'm not sure we've seen that yet. I think that Lando, the good thing about him winning 4 races is that whole Lando no-wins thing. I mean, it's crazy that we even used to call him that. He clearly is ready to win a lot of races. But I think, and you can maybe say the same about Charles Leclerc as well, there's winning a lot of races in a good car, and then there's taking the fight to Max Verstappen. Charles hasn't had that chance yet across the season. Lando's had about half a season, and I think he was kind of quite roundly beaten when it came to just head-to-head with Max, in those moments. So I'm not convinced yet, but I don't think that means Lando can't do it. I just think based on what we know currently, he can't. But maybe I'm being harsh on him because he was one of the standout drivers of the year, won 4 races, bunch of pole positions. But I think that he himself has admitted, and he's very self-critical, isn't he, Lando? Very, very quick to say I haven't been good enough. I think if he takes those lessons into next year and he actually acts on them, I think then yes, he can. But I think we need to see a little bit more because to beat Max, the level has to be perfect all the time, and you have to be willing to kind of get your knuckles dirty a little bit in a wheel-to-wheel fight with him. But what do you think? Do you think Lando can, or do you think? Well, am I being harsh?
I should agree with that last point. He claims that he has learned the lessons, and he claims that he did go into this season a little bit naive. He's probably bossed around by Max a little bit too much early on, didn't fight back enough, and so we'll find out.
Yeah,
hopefully quite early on next year whether he's able to stick to that, because since then I think we have seen slightly more resilient Lando. Again, that win in Abu Dhabi, it looked fairly easy, didn't it, from the front? But there was a huge amount of pressure. And obviously Piastri getting taken out by Max wasn't Oscar's fault, but all of a sudden, all the pressure was on Lando, because if Lando had lost that first place to Carlos Sainz and Oscar hadn't been able to get back into the points, then McLaren would have lost the championship right there. So, massive pressure on the team at that stage, massive pressure on Lando at that stage. And he was able to weather it. Now, that was only one race, and also a race where he was racing Ferrari drivers, not Max Verstappen, straight up, and of course had a car that looked like the most competitive. But my gut feeling is if the two of them, Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, are in very evenly matched cars, Max Verstappen still wins.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think he's just that good.
And I think that's fair. Max versus most drivers. I think just when he's in the groove he was for most of this year.
Yeah,
we're talking about a really high level. Beat.
And to be fair to Max as well, for most of this year he didn't have the best car. He had a car where he needed to grind out results to make sure that he continued to hold on to that lead right and through to Las Vegas when he won it. And he won it with 2 races remaining. So that is an incredibly high bar. And
we have Brazil as well, which was just one of the greatest drives most of us have ever seen in Formula One, certainly recently. And that, to me, that Brazil race was kind of, if you wanted to, there's that image, isn't there, of Max leading into turn 1 and Lando running wide. I know it's a bit misleading because Lando wasn't making a mistake there. He was kind of just going over into the slip road. But it kind of showed you the difference between them, that Lando had started pole in that race, should have been controlling it, and Max was just kind of disappearing off in the distance. That race, to me, showed you where the difference still is. Obviously, you could say that maybe in the wet, the Red Bull was better, but Max, when it is those moments when the pressure is on, I think he's still the guy you would want in the car in pretty much any situation. He's proven that time and time again. So it's not massively a knock on Lando. I think the bar is just so high.
Yeah,
everyone's kind of chasing that. So,
and it's the results that we don't shout about so much as well. Those results where just to get on the podium in a car that really deserves to be 6, or even just to be in the top 5 in a car that Max's teammate Sergio Perez was struggling to get out of Q1. I think that says a lot, and that's where Max won this championship. I think, while Brazil was obviously the point at which it kind of looked like it had gone beyond return, it was the results up to that, making sure he continued to score points when the car really wasn't there, that made the difference.
Just quick one for you as well. We talked about Lewis earlier, and we talked about Lando now, and we mentioned Charles. George Russell, very punchy, as you mentioned at the top of the show about Max. Do you think we've not really ever properly seen George and Max share the same bit of racetrack together? I really want to see it. What do you think happens in that situation? I know you know George very well, and you've followed his career a lot closer than I have from a much earlier stage. How do you think, if you were to predict it now, how would that look on track? Do you think George is doing what Lewis did and saying, I'm not playing your game?
He absolutely is, because he did it in Baku. Was it last year? When
in the side pod.
It was
that's right. I forgot
race.
about that. Yeah.
And so I think George just wouldn't relent. Now, whether that would actually work out for George in the long term, I'm not so sure. I mean, if he has a much more competitive car, then he probably could afford to play those kind of games. But I think, between the two of them, if it really came down to it, I think Max would, again, probably win out of those two. Again, we're kind of basing this on what we've seen, what we know about these drivers. But I think George would absolutely put up a fight every step of the way and actually relish doing so. In George's mind, he's the best driver in Formula One. And I think that is how every driver has to be hardwired. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's not a criticism. That's what I think he thinks. And so if he gets half a chance of against Max, I think he's going to be almost going too far to prove it. And we've seen it with George a few times, where just either chasing a victory or going after something, Singapore last year, perfect example, where he put it in the wall on the penultimate lap. Those kind of things happen with George. And that's where I fear he might let a championship slip. But my God, it would be entertaining seeing the two of them go off against each other.
And George always talks about how much inspiration he takes from Lewis. I do think there's a lot to be said that the two Mercedes drivers seem, one of them's the outgoing Mercedes driver, but they seem to be the most willing to just kind of call it how they see it with Max. And I think that comes from Toto.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that McLaren have learned this year is they need to be more like that. Pure and simple. I think Zach Brown has admitted that privately. I think Andreas Stella kind of started saying those things as well. And I think that they've realized our whole mindset has to be different. We just have to be more aggressive. Nothing negative against Max to say aggressive, because some of the best drivers of all time have been aggressive, and his style of racing is just so entertaining. But other drivers and teams now are realizing, if I've got the car to do it, that's not going to be enough against Max. I kind of have to fight fire with fire. So I'm really excited. Based on what you said about George, I'm excited to see that as well. I think that would be actually behind Max v Lewis Part 2. I think that'd actually be the one I'd pay to see after that one, I think.
Yeah, and to go back to that point you just made there as well, that's the difference between a midfield team and a front-running team, and a team that's used to being in the midfield and a team that is at the front, is that you have to have that winning attitude. You have to just not care, that killer instinct. And you're right, it does come from the top. Christian Horner and Toto Wolff will trade blows all day long in the media.
And Max races like Horner leads that team, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
It's front foot forward. It's a terrier. He's a little terrier. He doesn't care. He's going to go at you. To your point.
I mean, and it filters down. It filters down across everything, across the mechanics, pit crew. You do see these teams kind of built within molds. But if you're going up against a team that has that kind of terrier attitude, if that's how we're going to borrow Toto Wolff's phrase, then you've got to have something to fight back with it. And so I think that's something that, you're right, McLaren and Norris definitely learnt this year. And what will be fascinating next year is whether they kind of use that, whether they do slightly change their approach, whether they are a little bit more hard-nosed on certain decisions. That's something that we're going to have to watch out for, I think, right from the start of the season. Okay, so I've got down here, and this is a bit cruel to thrust on you, but I'm going to answer the question as well. Way too early prediction, because at the moment we've got a number of drivers who could fight for the title next year. We've obviously got Max Verstappen defending the championship. We've got two McLaren drivers that we've talked about, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Wouldn't put it past either of them. Two Ferrari drivers in Charles Leclerc and now Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, going for that title. And of course, then Mercedes, they're not that far away from being a genuine competitor. George Russell, who we just talked about, and Kimi Antonelli. And then whoever is partnering Max Verstappen, maybe Liam Lawson.
Yeah,
okay,
maybe.
so let's say you've got 8 drivers right there. Nate, which one are you picking right at this stage with no knowledge of how competitive the cars are going to be at the start of the season, completely blind, in the greatest ESPN tradition of way too early predictions? Where you put your money?
I mean, I respect you giving me this one first as well before I can throw it back to you. First of all, what an era of F1 we're in, that there is genuinely so many choices, because you're right, all the cars are so close. I think, even though we said McLaren are the team to beat, I think Max is still the driver to beat. The old Tifosi in me, though, is screaming at me to say a Ferrari driver, and I think the experience is going to win out. I think that Ferrari car is in a position that it can win a lot of races. Lewis, I think, is going to go there revitalized. This isn't going to do the British media bias allegations any good, but it's about an Italian team, and so it's not just that.
No, it's also half Italian.
Yeah, exactly. Stage, so come on, it's Italian media bias I'll take. But I think Lewis, I think that there's just something about him going to this team where they're at right now. Fred Vasseur has turned that team around in terms of there was always something just missing at the top. Benotto did a great job, but operationally there just wasn't something there. Fred has sorted all of that out. I think, again, because a bit like Lewis, he's come from the outside in. That's such a big part of the Ferrari story. Lewis, to me, feels like the final piece of that puzzle. Be a very interesting situation, him versus Charles next year, but I think if you were betting on either of those two guys, and part of the reason I've said Lewis as well, just to explain why, is I think he's the only person we've seen who has actually shown, here's how you race Max, and has said if we crash, we crash. And I think you have to be right with that. You have to be in your head. And Lewis has never been dirty with it. Silverstone was a great example where the two of them went for a very, very, very narrow piece of track. I think Stewart's got that right. Lewis was probably more to blame than Max. But it came from the only other option Lewis had there was, well, I'm going to back out and let Max pass me. He didn't do it. So I think that's going to be key. I think the Red Bull's kind of, is not in a great position. Maybe a bit of a spiral there. So Lewis Hamilton, 2025 champion with Ferrari. That's my call. And clip this up and abuse me with it. But if that does happen, incredible story, right? Because he's gone to Ferrari. And also, to him or Charles, the great thing about Ferrari right now, whichever one of those two guys wins the championship first, I mean, it's a compelling story either way. We're talking about a status of kind of Tifosi legend that obviously Schumacher's at the top, but put that person right underneath Schumacher, just given how long it's been, how desperate they are to win that. So I think it's going to be Lewis. What about you?
So I took this a little bit too seriously earlier in the week and set up a spreadsheet to try and figure out. Yeah, do we get to see the spreadsheet, or is it?
I
mean, it's here. I have it in front of me. It's just numbers, but they do mean something. I mean, it's not actually that complicated. What I did is I took the season from the summer break onwards to see who would, if you turn that into an 11 race mini season, who would come out on top, in the thinking that would give me the biggest indication of form, basically form both from team and driver going forward. And no, I've already told you who won this mini. I was going to put it to you.
Wait. You mean we talked before this pod?
But you might think, Lando Norris, right? I mean, he was.
I would have thought that, honestly. I really would have done.
And I was expecting that to be the case. It's actually Charles Leclerc by 4 points. So 179 points since the summer break. Lando Norris 175 points. Max Verstappen 160 points. And that led me to think, right, Charles Leclerc. I mean, it also backs up your Ferrari theory. And, and if we're looking at a Ferrari potential championship challenge, it's hard to look past Lewis Hamilton right at that team. So I did this maths and I thought,
it sounds like you're about to look past Lewis Hamilton.
Well, I thought, okay, maybe I'll go with Leclerc. Just, here we go.
I think you should do it.
No one ever picks Leclerc at this stage. Following it, I can't do it.
Really?
I can't do it.
I think because I've said Lewis now.
No. Well, who do you think I'm going to say then?
I think you're going to say Lewis.
No,
you're not.
No, I'm going to say Max Verstappen.
Okay.
Because actually, he got 160 points. So he was 19 points behind Leclerc in that period. I just think no matter who is Max's teammate next year, probably Liam Lawson, they're not really going to be taking points off him. And also, they're going to be very much on a short leash. You have to help Max win this title. Leclerc v Hamilton,
box office.
If your prediction is correct, could go crazy, could go nuclear. The two of them against each other. I think it will actually be fascinating because Leclerc seems like a teammate who gets very angry at specific times with his teammate, but very rarely causes a major thing. And usually they're laughing by the next race. So I think the two of them will stay together. But still, that's a really hard one to pick because you've got Leclerc incredibly fast over a single lap. Lewis notoriously struggled over a single lap.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, that used to be his strength, didn't it? And you're right. Just to go on that with the Ferrari guys, I struggled making that pick when you threw it at me so heartlessly out of nowhere.
Got another one in a minute.
Because I think that, to be honest with you, this is where I'm more than happy at the end of the year to say I was completely wrong about it. I think one of the things everyone's talking about Lewis at Ferrari, and I've just said then that he can win the championship. I think one of the most compelling parts of the story is we finally get confirmation of how good Charles Leclerc is. You know, I think we know he's great. We know he's very, very well. We know he's very, very good, right? Is he that level of great? And the line between being very, very good and being great is one that not a lot of drivers get across. And I don't think it's insulting to say he's not great, but we'll find out. You know, if he comes out and if he blows Lewis Hamilton away from the beginning, suddenly you're like, wow, I mean, that is proof enough that you needed. Maybe people could say, well, Lewis has lost a step, whatever. You're still beating Lewis Hamilton. You know, I always felt at Mercedes, Nico Rosberg never got that credit when he was beating Michael Schumacher. Everyone said, oh, Michael's lost a step. He had come back late, but it's like you're still beating the brain. You're still beating the driver, you know, the aura that is in that other car. So if Charles can prove me wrong, hell of a statement. But I just think that where that team is, the experience Lewis has, I think as well, just the knowledge of Max and stuff. But to your point, when you said that about Max, my first thought was 2007, the McLaren drivers taking points off each other all year, letting Kimi Raikkonen in their last championship. Not only are Ferrari potentially going to do that, but McLaren as well with Piastri and Lando.
This is it. I mean, you know, the Piastri Lando thing, I mean, it's not going to be easy to manage next year. I know they did a fairly good job in the end, but it was bungled, wasn't it, with papaya rules and knowing exactly what that meant.
Papaya rules, yeah. Still don't know. I still
when
don't know
it was on and when it was off. So I just think that out of all of that, it could still be Max, you know. And the Red Bull, because of that win in Qatar, had they not won in Qatar, I'm not sure I'd be so certain about it. But because of that win in Qatar, and also, you know, the fact he was third on the grid in Abu Dhabi, he obviously had that collision with Piastri. By the way, Max's fault, I think. But, you know, indication that Red Bull actually maybe aren't quite as far off at the end of this year as we thought they might be midway through the season when things were really slumping.
Yeah, and I've made the cardinal sin in Formula One of betting against Max Verstappen, which you just can't do.
I've done it enough times.
He's just different level. So, you know, that will no doubt will come back to haunt me down the line.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.